My name is Ryan Pretty, and I am here to present my reflective presentation for our Week 4 assignment in my Psychology Lifespan class at Colorado Christian University for Professor Christine Good. In this presentation, I chose to interview an older adult in his late stages of life. This gentleman has 90-plus years of life experience and made for an interesting subject to study, especially given the context of this class. From our study of infants to late adulthood, I will touch on some of the clinical aspects that are present throughout my interview. In my interview with this 91-year-old Korean War veteran, I will ask these questions. How did life events shape this man's development? Does he express integrity? What were the effects of significant loss and trauma? What role has faith played in his life? This man was born December 17th, 1930. He is currently 91 years old. I will make note that he was born in the middle of the Great Depression and, like most families, had to deal with the lack of food supplies and money at the time. The first life events that shaped this man's life: his father died when he was 2 years old. His memories, along with information from his older sister, recalls memories of listening to baseball games on the radio with his father and his father making him breakfast. He did note that he loved his father. He missed him very much, and he thinks about him a lot. That brings me to the emotional and developmental health during his childhood and the effects that these events caused him, like the loss of his father and being raised in the Great Depression. The socio-emotional relationship that develops between an infant and a parent, usually but not necessarily the mother, is special. This is a baby's first relationship, and scientists and parents believe that it should be satisfying and trouble-free to set the stage for later relationships. One statement that stuck out to me during our interview when we were talking about what it was like growing up in the Great Depression, and I quote, "I was happy all the time. As long as I had something to eat, I didn't care." This made me think of pre-operational thinking in our textbook, specifically centration. A second characteristic of pre-operational thinking is that children seem to have the psychological equivalent of tunnel vision. They often concentrate on one aspect of a problem but ignore other equally relevant aspects. Centration is Paget's term for the narrowly focused thought that characterizes pre-operational youngsters. So my conclusion to growing up in the Great Depression, it was a very bad time. It was a very hard time for everybody. And as a young kid, losing his father, not really having much, he was still focused on being happy because he could run, he could go play with his friends. And that's that was a defense mechanism on some level. I also found a good peer-reviewed article that expanded on the results of poverty and the effects of poverty on young children's emotional health. Iman, in the article, "The Effects of Poverty on Children's Socio-Emotional Development and Ecological System Analysis." The summary: the nested structures of the ecological environment proposed by Bronfenbrenner's process-person-context-time model provided a useful framework for examining theories of the effects of economic deprivation on children's socio-emotional development. Within the microsystem of home, stress coping theory and family process models frequently are used to explain the socio-emotional development effects of poverty. The stressful life events of chronic strain caused by economic deprivation appear to affect children's socio-emotional functioning by eroding parental coping behaviors, creating psychological distress and marital discord, and resulting in parenting practices that are uninvolved, inconsistent, emotionally unresponsive, and harsh. The review suggests that practitioners who work with low-income families and children with socio-emotional problems should assess parental psychological distress coping behaviors that the quality of the marital and partner relationships are parenting practices to assist in selecting appropriate intervention. I recall a story he was telling me about some of these trauma events when he grew up a little bit in his adolescence. His stepfather severely beating him around the age of 12. In that story, he recalls, in this story of him telling me almost 60 years later, he still had some emotion attached to this. He recalls being beaten while on the ground by his stepfather, and his mother bending a fire poker over his stepfather's back to stop him. Pretty traumatic experience. And the trauma at an adolescent age, growing up in the Great Depression, going without a lot. A lot of his friends had fathers that were still in their home. And that's what caused him to enlist at 16, actually, into the Army. He served about 1 month, 19 days, he recalls, and then he got kicked out because they found out how old he was. And then just with that level of depression, the level of trauma, he decided to enlist and go for it again. And he enlisted again at the age of 17, which brings us to the Korean War. This was a hard conversation for him, and I just let him expand on what he felt comfortable with. He recalls the horrors of war. He did have severe PTSD, and he has since, and I'll get into that a little bit later. He has taken some medication. It hasn't helped that much. He recalls people being shot and killed, and he recalls dead bodies being thrown down wells. So, in the time of war, witnessing that has caused some severe PTSD. He remembers being shipped off to Japan during the war for 2 weeks on something called a 1059 engineering school to work on bridge repair. He was an engineer in the Army, and he was shipped off to go understand a little bit on how to work on bridges. And this is when he had his first experience with PTSD. He experienced sitting in a training room and having an overwhelming feeling of emotions that he described as horrible. Back then, people didn't know what it was, so he just learned to live with it. He spent the rest of his life living with what I consider debilitating anxiety and PTSD. He did grow up in church, and later in life, he leaned into Scripture a little bit more. Regarding the PTSD, he's found some comfort in reading Scripture daily. I asked him if he used his faith to work through some of these events or situations, and his response was pretty simple. I'm sure I have. Like when I got out of the Army after war, I prayed for a house and I got it, so I guess my prayer was answered. I tried to dive deeper into the spiritual aspect of this and trauma and coping, and on this topic I asked what makes him want to help people. He said, and I quote, "I was so poor, I know how hard it can be. And I like to see people happy. If I know I can help someone, it makes me feel good." We shared a scripture. We shared some prayer at the end of our interview, and we both kind of read some of these together. He liked this one: "Carry each other's burdens, and so you will fulfill the law of Christ." Regarding the integrity in our textbook, 3 aspects of great grandparenthood appear to be most important. First, being a great grandparent provides a sense of personal and family renewal, important components for achieving integrity. Kylie and Kavanaugh. So in conclusion, this man has lived through some of the most stressful, traumatic events that I can imagine. And he carries a lot of pain with him with little support from outside sources. He comes from just a different time. It was a time where people didn't really know what this stuff was, and now that we have, psychology, and we have these breakthroughs and some understanding, he's getting a little bit more help with that, and he's going to the VA, and he's getting a better picture on what PTSD is and what anxiety is. And I just want to thank him for this opportunity to interview him. And here are my references. And thank you.